Okay, there we go. Good. All right, so this is the panel discussion for Who's Afraid of XFA. Should be interesting. There was a lot of very polite agreement yesterday during the panel discussion. I'm not expecting that today, so we'll see how this goes. My name is Joel Geraci. I am the evangelist for DataLogix, as well as my own consultancy, Practical PDF, which you see right up there, practicalpdf.com for all of your PDF needs. So I'd like to have my panelists introduce themselves. Bruno, you have the mic, so you start, but Leonard, you have to go last because I have a question for you to start everything off. So go ahead.
Okay, I'm Bruno Lowagie. I'm the original developer of iText, a PDF library, and I'm currently the CEO of the iText group with subsidiaries in Europe, the US, and Singapore.
So I'm Chuck Myers. I used to be with Adobe and was the manager for Lifecycle or manager for our server products when we acquired Excelio and brought in XFA and Designer and Output. I was the evangelist for XFA for a long time and have been working with XFA as I do my own consultancy since I left Adobe back in 2011.
And Leonard.
Leonard Rosenthol. I'm the PDF architect here at Adobe and also represent some various standards bodies. So as I like to say, it's all my fault.
Okay, so when Duff had approached me about being the moderator for this panel discussion and described to me the title, I was very excited because I thought this is going to be great. I just have to throw a bear knife onto the floor and watch them go at it. But then I looked up what the word moderator meant and figured maybe I should do something else. So I actually want to start, well, first of all, after the first couple of questions, please have this be interactive. If you have questions, and I'm sure a lot of you do, about the future of XFA and where everything is, just raise your hand. We want to keep Duff really busy running around and passing out the microphone. And we have 50 minutes to fill, and I've only got a few questions. But I somehow I think we're not going to run, or we're going to run out of time. But to start with, Leonard, can you just sort of give us a level set of where we are with XFA and 32000-1, and then where we are with PDF 2.0, which is, and sort of what the current state of is with that?
Sure, be glad to. So as many of you may, or I guess maybe you may not know, so when Adobe turned over PDF to the ISO, we had, and actually it was what is required by ISO when you do what's called a fast track standard, which is the process we went through. And a fast track standard is where you take an existing standard and you basically just ship it out the door with an ISO mark on it and number and everything else. We could have done exactly that. We didn't. We wanted to do a little extra step, which is we took a group of 5 of us here at Adobe. Took a few months, and we actually rewrote it in what's called, we love to refer to as ISO-ease, which is the language, of course, of an ISO standard. But all of the technical material, for the most part, was untouched. We actually removed some stuff, but we didn't add anything. So the fact is that what is in ISO 32000-1 is exactly what's in PDF 1.7. If you actually compare the technical aspects of the two standards, again, there's basically no change. So what that meant was because PDF 1.7 has a reference to this technology, the Extensible Forms Architecture, XFA, so does ISO 32000, and part 1. And again, because it was fast-tracked, no technical changes were allowed to be made to the standard as part of the ISO process. So it went in, basically it had to be ratified. There were editorial changes allowed, but no technical changes. So it went through an editorial process at ISO and then was ratified as the standard a year later. It was a very quick process. That's done. It's been shipping now since 2008. And it is in there. It says, here's how you put it in there. And it says, you know, if you see it, a conforming viewer is supposed to process it. That's what the language basically says. But it doesn't tell you what it is. It, like many other things in PDF, it points out to the side. So it does what's called a normative reference. and it says the XFA spec is over here. And it does the same thing for TrueType and JPEG and a bunch of other things. So it's not special in any way. It's just a normative reference. So it's over there. All right, so 32,000 Part 2 comes along. One of the big things that the committee is doing as part of Part 2 is removing all proprietary references, specifications, everything out of the spec, unless for some reason we just can't. So all references to Adobe, I think except one, have been removed. There were a couple of references to Microsoft that have been removed, et cetera, Apple, I mean, all of various companies have been removed. Various proprietary standards have been deprecated or removed. So the 32,000 Part 2 is sort of pure, open, standard ISO process. And part of that is that XFA has been deprecated, is the official terminology, out of 32,000 Part 2. And what that means is that a writer shall not write an XFA into a 32,000 Part 2 compliant file, but a reader is still free to read that information if it comes across it. That's what deprecated means. So it's a very long-winded description, but hopefully there was a reason for all of those pieces because it sort of sets the stage for a lot of this.
So just to clarify, that's free to read but not required to read.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And in fact, I would actually say the other way, which is, more than likely you should ignore it.
Yeah.
We don't say that, but that's what deprecated really is. You should ignore this, but if you want to process it, that's fine. We're not stopping you.
Sure. Okay. All right. So here's the big question for me, and this is for the full panel. That I'm done with the individual questions. So the problem that XFA really solved, especially in comparison to Acroforms, is that the form fields, tables, a number of other form types could shrink and grow depending on how much information you'd go in there, and still maintain the paper metaphor. With HTML5 and the advances in CSS since that time, is a dynamic paper metaphor necessary anymore? Opinions?
Okay. Internally, we make a distinction between two different topics. One is, and that's not official language, one is what we call dynamic forms, and the other is dynamic templates. When we talk about dynamic forms, we talk about forms that need to be filled out by an end user, by a human being. And I think that while XFA had a lot of advantages, like you select the country and you get all the states, and maybe depending on the country it doesn't say states but provinces and so on, so it's dynamic. And I think that for dynamic forms, XFA is beaten by HTML5. I mean, HTML5 is the way to collect data from an end user. As for dynamic templates, what do I mean by dynamic templates? Well, for instance, we had to talk about invoices just before this one. Invoices, you could create a template in Acroforms, and then you have, for instance, a first page with 20 invoice lines. But of course, one invoice has only 10 lines, another invoice has 30 lines, then you have to kind of extend the form. And so Acroforms may not be the ideal solution for that. And we then need a dynamic template. And I think XFA is really well suited for this, because XFA accepts any kind of XML. So you can create your template based on your XML schema. And we talked about PDF as a platform yesterday, and somebody asked for a definition of the PDF as a platform, and we only got one answer. But I sense that from the questions, many people see PDF as something for the end user, something in the viewer, and that's very limited. We're in the business of enterprise PDF, so PDFs with 1 million of pages, and that's not really for human consumption. No, but that's just for archiving, for statements and stuff like that. And we see in the enterprise that if you look at PDF as a platform, PDF is part of an ecosystem where XML also has an important place. XML is in the transport layer, is how businesses transport data. And so XFA as a PDF technology has its place there. you can inject an XML into the PDF, into the XFA. The XFA knows how to render it, and we had this discussion about invoices. What if you have XML and a PDF? Both need to show the same data. When a machine reads it or when a human reads it, they need to read the same data. That's where XFA has its place. Well, that's my opinion, as a dynamic template.
I'll give you some of that, but Chuck's making faces like he needs to interject something here.
So my question is, so XFA.
You don't get to ask questions.
Oh yeah, yes he does. I'll be chumming.
For the audience.
I'm just a monkey up here with a microphone.
XFA may be a great templating language. Is there a need for it to be inside PDF? I mean, there are many templating languages around. I mean, XSLT and XSLFO are prime one. They're great at creating PDF. There are 20 different ones that they'll create, not just PDF, but AFP and other such things. Do we need to have this inside PDF for it to be useful? And
Well, at iText we have an XFA solution, and then we have what we call the poor man's XFA. That's XML work. That's where you have HTML, CSS. You merge your data into your HTML, or you create an XSL, and then you merge the CSS. And so that's what I call the poor man XFA. It works for in a lot of contexts. So that's a valid solution. But XFA has some. It has these PDF objects that allow software to PDF software. Yeah, you can add the fonts inside, so you have everything contained in one place. The only thing you have to do is inject the XML. You don't have to create the HTML with your pre-process your HTML, and yeah, you can use your own schema, and that's one of the powers.
The only counterpoint I'll add, let me just jump in, is I saw a demo of PDF Chip yesterday that was pretty awesome in terms of generating dynamic documents from HTML. I mean, if you're looking for a good templating solution, you got one there.
Go buy that from the org.
Go ahead, sorry, Leonard.
I think one of the places, I don't know if it's where Chuck was going or not, but Bruno, you and I have had this conversation before, but I'll point out to the audience that there's actually, before we put XFA into PDF, XFA existed by itself. And to this day, it still can exist as a standalone thing. Today, and for many, many years now, there's a format called XDP. It stands for XML Data Package, I believe. Yeah, just checking. And so the way that actually Chuck once described it to me was as an inside-out XFA-based PDF. So if you think of, normally you have a PDF as the wrapper and XFA inside. XDP is an XML file with the PDF inside. And it is, yeah, I'm going to let Chuck explain.
So actually, the name of the operation that we had for this was called turncoat. Okay, so if you could imagine a reversible raincoat, okay, you could turn it once, with the beige side out or the plaid side out. So one would be a complete XML representation, the other would be a PDF representation with the pieces inside. So I think there are probably still references to turncoat somewhere in the new spec. I don't know.
There may be. Anyway, there may be, but I think what I wanted to point out was that I think the argument Bruno makes for XFA and its relationship to PDF is a very good one, and especially as a templating language. I think those are excellent points. I think that the use of it inverted or turn-coded or whatever the verb is, I think addresses a lot of those needs because you get all of the benefits without the need to have PDF as the outer wrapper.
Yeah, but you said we are going to remove things that don't belong in the PDF specification. But what we're doing with XFA is more than just removing. It's deprecating. A PDF writer shall not write, and that's why do we need the shall not write? Why not just remove it? That would be easier because then PDF writers who want to write it can still write it. And there are other technologies that are proprietary, that are still allowed in the PDF platform, and we exclude XFA, and that's where I have difficulties to accept it.
Yeah, and Doug has a question in the back.
So as we're talking about templating processes or that, so where does PDF fall in?
So great question. So PDF VT, for those of you who don't know, the VT stands for variable and transactional, designed for that industry. Probably the stupidest thing we did was give it that name, because everybody, no. I mean, we didn't have a better name, I'll be honest, and I'll give you an even worse name in a second. Because what we did is we made it sound like that it's actually a templating language, that it actually does on-the-fly substitution, and it doesn't. In fact, it's specifically designed to not do that. What it's designed to do is to handle high-volume printing where all of the content is pre-generated but is substituted quickly. And anyway, we can spend the whole hour on VT, but VT doesn't address that. There's a new standard in development, here comes the really bad name, called PDF VCR. We'll be working on, there's a Sony version, there's a Betamax, and VHS. But yeah, oddly enough, it's actually called VCR for variable content replacement. And the whole point of this standard is actually to address real-time content substitution. It's happening in TC130, where PDFX and PDFVT take place. They'll be meeting in Seoul in a couple of weeks, and if all goes well, we'll finally kill it. It is a very, and I say that it is a very controversial standard because it addresses the templating problem to an extent, but it is the way it goes about it is very controversial. So, but if you're interested in that area and you're looking for a trip to Seoul, a couple of weeks, I highly recommend it.
Okay, so next question for the full panel, and really goes to where Bruno, I think, well, combination of Bruno and Chuck's points, is should XFA viewing tools really just simply be separate pieces of software that perhaps require a different file extension or can consume a PDF that has one of these in there? And if, include in your answer, how we would help transition customers to this new environment.
Sure, I'll take yeah, why not? Which is, just going off a couple things that happened in the mobile session that I was just in, you do have major problems with PDF that, you're not going to see XFA ever implemented in mobile. I mean, I think that's a given for two reasons. One, it's big. The other thing is, it's complex. It's as complex as a full web browser would be. And so if it's never going to be there, how do you go and have this be simpler and to have the power to it? It would be great if there was I've never considered this, Joel, that one should go and have a viewer which just did XFA forms. And that would be a feature that people would offer, and you could actually talk about that and compete on that level.
Two comments. So when I looked at XFA in the context of PDF 2.0, I noticed that nowhere in the spec it defines a file extension for PDF. It only defines a file extension for FDF.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that was a marketing decision.
Well, historically it probably was, but we actually have corrected that in the latest. It should have been already fixed in the latest draft, which was an error by our co-editors, but it's being fixed in the most recent one. There is the PDF's MIME type is actually defined in an RFC from the IETF, which has been updated, and so we've updated the RFC, and we are referencing that from 32,000 Part 2. So yeah, it's an excellent point, which has been fixed.
Good.
And so if we would keep either XFA in the spec, if we would keep XFA in the spec, then I would suggest that we create an extension .xfa so that there's no confusion that people, if they try to open it and they don't see it in their viewer, then they should expect that it renders. The other option is that we remove XFA, so not deprecated, but just removed, just like we did with all the references to XFA, they were already removed. Now that's one aspect. The second question is, should we have an XFA specific viewer? And I think that makes sense. We've done a project for the government in Belgium where the processes were all XML based. The citizen filled something out on a web form. He used his EID and information about the citizen came from different sources, and all the data was stored in an XML. But this XML, the civil servants who have to deal with the application of the citizen, they have to they need a viewer to view the XML. And they used Adobe Reader, so they injected the XML into an XFA, used Adobe Reader to check the data. And so there was a back and forth process, because the citizen has to maybe give additional information, correct information, and so on. And then once the data is approved, then it gets persisted as a PDF A level A. So then, only then, it's a fixed document that goes to the citizen, that is archived, and so on. So there is a market, I think, for a viewer that does something like this, that takes XML and renders it in a human-readable form, that can then be persisted as a PDF A level A. And why I like XFA is that you have this XML, so it already has structure. So creating an accessible document, creating a tagged document is like a piece of cake, because you have all the semantics, you know everything, you know the meaning of every type of information that you have in your XML. And so in the previous talk, I showed an example of a Zugwert invoice, where you have a cross-industry invoice standard for XML that describes an invoice. And you could easily think of an XFA template that renders this CII, this machine-readable invoice, into an invoice that can be read by a human.
Yep. Oh, we have a question.
Yes,
Great.
I had
Thank you.
one comment and then one question. So with regards to creating a separate viewer, I mean, I was there when we put it into Reader and Acrobat proper, and obviously the reasoning for that was just, it's semi-ubiquitous, right? I mean, now it's not as ubiquitous as it was before, but it's pretty ubiquitous. All of a sudden, everybody in the world pretty much can open up an XFA file. The moment you take it out and say, hey, let's create a new application, you know, all of a sudden everybody has to install a new application. And that's definitely a big downside. And I know when we were dealing with the PDF Healthcare Committee, that was one of the big things. We said, hey, you have this self-contained PDF that can be read by anywhere, by anyone, anywhere, and can be manipulated by anyone with Acrobat, right? So that was a big value add in that way. Now, with regards to the question, I don't know if any of you can answer this, but what is XFA's usage today? Like, I mean, it's still in Reader. Are there still a lot of files being generated? Is it being used in government, finances, education? Like, I mean, I know that Adobe focused it on a couple of verticals, but I don't know where it's at. Does anyone know?
Well, I mean, I'll comment from what I know, and you guys obviously have additional to that. But it's still used in. I would say that it is not growing, but I don't know that it's shrinking either. I think it's fairly stagnant, mostly because a lot of people have already bought into it and are using it and continue to use it. I mean, examples: the U.S. Government tax forms. Every single tax form on the U.S. On the IRS website is an XFA-based PDF. That's a lot of PDFs that get produced, downloaded, and submitted. There are other U.S. government agencies that also do the same, but that's certainly the most prevalent one. We have partners that also do a lot of work in enterprise to do that. So, I mean, I don't have specifics, but that's a good example. And I'm sure you guys have some of your customers.
Yeah, from customers that I've gone out and visited, even within the past few years, I've seen people that have taken their library of forms and form fragments and converted them all over to XFA. On the order of 10 to 20 man-years worth of effort just in the form design. So there's a deep commitment to this out there that just isn't going to go away. Designer, I don't know Adobe sales numbers, but I've heard things of Designer actually still selling pretty well, even though it's just on the Windows platform. So, the customers are out there using it. Bruno, what's your experience? Do you have a...
And so our XFA customers are mainly in government and financial. So government, especially if their backend systems runs on XML, if they work with XML. And what we see from the financial world is, for instance, insurance companies that, well, they store their data, for instance, on a mobile device in XML, and then they send the XML to a server, and it gets imported in an XFA document. So those are the two main verticals, and we're now working on a larger form solution where we have 3 pilot customers. One is Ministry of Health, one is a Ministry of Justice, and the other is a social security, health security instance in Belgium. So that's the market that we serve.
Great, thank you. Actually, that brought me right exactly to the next question that I have on my list here is, in the current environment, knowing what we know, at least right now, where we are with PDF2, what are we going to tell customers? I mean, what is the responsible thing to do to tell both viewer developers?
Joel's phone number is.
Well, you can let me answer it.
All right, Chuck's phone
Yeah,
number
Chuck knows
is.
my phone number too. Yeah, okay, so just actually before you guys answer, and I'm not sure if you guys want to share your plans in this public environment, but for those of you that are developing viewers, how many of you are planning on offering, or were planning on offering XFA support?
You
Sometime
missed
in
the
the future.
first part of the question,
Oh, sorry.
which is how many of you already support?
How many of you already support it? Thank you. Yeah. Phil can raise his hand.
Honestly.
Uh,
Everyone says to a certain extent.
So we have
You
a,
guys do.
I think a good question would be.
can we get let's get the mic back there for you?
Maybe a correct question would be, how many of you offer proper support for exit?
I'm talking at all, because if we
Listen,
worried about,
Then you get into the proper support for PDF, and we had
Yeah,
that whole conversation
exactly.
yesterday, so.
I'll just say Apple. I had one for lunch, that's all I'm saying.
And Apple's actually, the fruit company nearby, to quote Doug, is actually an interesting example, because they do support a limited set of XFA in their viewer.
Really?
Yes.
Static.
Sorry?
Static?
And apparently dynamic.
Really?
Ralph and I discovered this fairly recently. We did. You don't remember that email thread? Good.
Yeah.
The implant is working. We'll see me after the.
Yeah, okay, so for, if you care to share, or if you care to make a comment related to what you don't care to share, or care not to share, however you would put that, what's your experience of trying to implement XFA in a way that is interoperable with Acrobat? Anybody want to offer? Crickets. Okay. Good.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
I mean, writing XFA is actually quite
Easy.
quote unquote easy.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
sure.
XML, right? So I mean, I know there were a lot of machine-written XFAs or server-written or XSLT-written XFAs, right?
true.
So that's
Yep.
one area that you don't even have to count, because really these things are just producing them in mass.
Sure.
The other question I had is what is the status of XFA spec? Why not just hand it over to ISO and go from there? Why keep it proprietary? I mean, it's open, but
No, it's a great question, Anatol. And the answer, the honest answer is that our XFA, the marketing department, or its product management, marketing, et cetera, folks responsible for XFA are not convinced that they are at a point where the language is stable. They believe that they may wish to extend it in the future, and therefore, if they turn it over to a standards body, they are correct in that it freezes at the point they've turned it over. Now, obviously, they can advance it, just like we've done with PDF 2.0, but that was in 2007 we turned it over, and it's now 2015, and PDF 2.0 is still not published yet. They don't want to do that with XFA. So if and when they are convinced that they're done evolving or whatever XFA, I have their commitment to turn it over if there's still industry interest. But at this time, they are still not interested.
Bruno?
Why would you extend it? The first thing I want to do with XFA is kind of reduce it, because there are like 1,001 ways to achieve the same thing, and that's what's really difficult if you want to implement XFA.
I'll turn it down. I'm not saying I do, but I will. There's a one-word answer: customers. It's what apparently, like I said, I mean, I'm not sitting here justifying this. I am just passing on information to answer a question. There are customers out there using it, and you guys pointed out that there are customers using this technology who clearly want additional capabilities. I can't tell you what they are. I don't know. I mean, it's not even like I can't tell you. I don't know what they are. I don't know why they want to do this. I'm just passing along the info.
The other thing that I will say is that Adobe's been doing great things with XFA in their processing, with the Forms product that's turning this out to HTML and for output. So if I look at Adobe's interests, it's being served well by XFA the way it is right now. Let me change the subject a little bit here, because I want to bring things to the group. Sorry to take moderation away from you, Joel. But there was a
No
thing
one's ever
which happened-
associated my name with moderation.
which happened in the last session, where people were asking about image fields and the ability to have an image, even in an acro form, and to be able to send things back. And the thing that I can tell you, since I was there was at one point a meeting at Adobe where we were deciding which form technology to move forward with. I don't know if you were in the room for that one. Okay, but it was, do we move forward with XFA or do we move forward with acroforms? And we decided to move forward with XFA because it had all the extensibility in XML and all the features that you heard about. But a bad thing happened in the midst of that, which is acroforms stopped. And so image fields aren't there. Simple things as, XFDF is, it's not an optimal form, and it isn't really quite XML. What is being done, if you're going to deprecate XFA, what would you like to see happen in acroforms so that it can be a solid format for going and doing forms even without all this?
Yeah, before any of you answer, and I agree with Chuck, I'd love to hear answers to that question. I will tell you that I'm currently chairing an ad hoc working group for the 32,000 committee, so on the area of advancing acroforms. So as we finish 32,000 Part 2, we're starting to think about what we want to do next with PDF. And advancing acroforms is absolutely one of them. And so I've got what's called an ad hoc working group specifically addressing that. So yeah, as Chuck said, I would also love to hear feedback from folks.
I think acroforms still have their place in a transition process, where people who are used to paper, we want to make them acquainted with digital, and so acroforms as digital paper is good as a transition. But as a technology for the future, I think it's, and sorry for cursing in the church, but I think it's bringing a dead horse to the race, because acroforms will never, you will never be able to do responsive design with acroforms. Everything is fixed, and so how are we going to solve? How are we going to kind of compete with HTML5? For instance, if I have a text field and I want to add a large abstract to for instance, in a call for papers, I can just drag and drop and make the text field bigger. Or are we going to do that with acroforms, where everything has its fixed positions and there's no reflow? I think that's the biggest flaw. That's what.
And I'm not saying you're wrong, but that's absolutely a topic worth investigating. I don't believe that it is an insolvable problem. It's a difficult problem. And the fact is, there are different levels also of responsive design. I think being able to resize a field, being able to add entries to a table, each of those is a different thing. Being able to reflow a field from one line to another is another level. I mean, responsive design, if you look at it from the web perspective, means many different things. And I do believe that you can apply responsive design techniques to PDF in general if they're done, appropriately. And I'm not saying I know how to solve the problems right now, but we've spent, almost 2 full days, and I will say that we've heard from a number of people who believe that that this is a good direction to explore. Many people have commented about, where we bring these things together, and so I think it would be, it's worthwhile. Look at it. I don't think we should shut it down to begin with.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge.
So we raised the question to the floor.
Bob, if you've got a microphone back.
So you asked for comments from the peanut gallery as to what we would like to see moving forward. So for me, from my perspective, corporate land USA, I'd like to see something that's scalable. I don't care what the underlying technology is. I don't care if it's Acroforms. I don't care if it's XFA. I don't care if it's something that's not yet developed. But what I'd like to see is something that I could generate one form, send it to somebody, have them fill it out, send it back. And I can take that model and organically grow that with other tools, other processes to, I need to send it out to 10,000 people, I need to send it out to 10 million people, and now automate that process without having to go back and re-engineer the form. Because as Chuck was talking about, yeah, they spent 20 man-years redeveloping their forms. But the thing is a lot of this stuff starts growing in a corporation, not as a top-down process or project. They start from bottom-up things, just trying to meet the need of a client for a specific situation, and then they end up growing into a production process. So whatever it is that you guys end up deciding to come up with, it needs to scale from the small to the large, and it needs to go up and down that scale organically through the process. That's just my 3 cents.
I'll give you back to.
Any other feedback on the forms, things that you want to see in the next version of forms? Okay, so I'll get back to my question that was a little bit earlier. Nobody's fessing up about their plans for XFA and viewers. So what should we, and I mean collectively, maybe there are some differences of opinion, hopefully there are, what should we be telling customers who are looking to either further invest in XFA or looking for new form solutions?
So in the projects we're doing, we're saying that the battle for XFA, if there is a battle, is lost on the client side. So we propose HTML5. I think that everybody's moving in that direction. But we still promote XFA or XDP. Some of our customers use XDP. We don't have a preference over one or another. That it's something that lives on the server side and that is used in a real enterprise environment where scale is indeed important. And we've gotten a couple of ex-Adobe customers that moved to iText precisely because they didn't want to re-engineer their forms and they needed an XFA solution.
So are you saying that you've got this dynamic XFA on the server, but what gets delivered on the end is a static PDF?
Yeah.
That kind of process?
So data entry is through the browser and different resources. XML is created, and the end product most of the times needs to be a PDF A level A. That's
okay. Leonard?
First, we'd like the names of those customers, please.
Always be selling.
Yes, sorry.
No, that's good.
I think, I certainly don't disagree with anything you said, Bruno. I think those are all good directions. I think the other thing I would point out is that 32,000 Part 2 is not a replacement for 32,000 Part 1. Both standards remain. And that's very important in general, but even more so in this particular context. Because what it means is that every single one of those XFA-based PDFs that have already been produced and that will continue to be produced using the tools that already exist and potentially new tools will continue to be 32,000 Part 1 compliant. That never changes, ever. That's the whole point of a standard. So now, it means that those customers may not be able to take advantage of some new feature in 32,000 Part 2 by having the XFA embedded inside of the PDF. But it doesn't preclude the use of XDP, because XDP is a completely separate standard and says nothing about the PDF inside of it. So my message, again, my personal message, or speaking for Adobe, is continue to use XFA the way you already have. We're not changing a single thing. Everything's going to continue to work the way it has. And if you do need new features, then I think XDP, for a variety of reasons, is a better direction.
Yeah, I don't have any comment.
Okay, great.
Okay, so that was the end of my list of questions, more or less. I have some really obscure ones. So was that a stretch or a no? Okay.
Was so much
All right.
bear fight and
I was hoping. I have some really controversial questions here.
Well, actually, let me ask one
Yep.
sort of along your line of how many people have implemented XFA, which is how many of you in your products have been asked if you would support XFA?
Yep.
Okay, so that's a larger set.
That is a significantly larger set. Okay, so with a show of hands, how many people think that the viewers, that a conforming viewer, how would you put that? That viewers ought to be able to display XFA in terms of customers? Handful. Okay, so here's my question to the group about the people who have been requested to support XFA. The concept of a dynamic page metaphor and the way that annotations, multimedia, all the interactive elements inside of a PDF file, how they work, just don't lend themselves to a dynamic document. So the solution that Adobe's come up with is that a lot of your UI grays out. So how, personally, I think that's confusing to customers because they don't understand what kind of form they have. If you were in support of having viewers view XFA, how would you handle that situation?
Actually, I'll take this one because I had to answer that, the specific question of why can't I put annotations on an XFA form? And I never came up with a good answer to that, except it's a different architecture, it just doesn't make sense to do that. And
I'm going to ask a follow-up, so go ahead.
okay.
But continue, yeah.
Actually, that's the end of my thing. I think
Customers like that answer?
What?
Customers like that answer?
No,
We have a comment.
but the flip side is oh yeah, Anatole, bail me out.
I'll bail you. Well, I don't know if I'll bail you out or not, but I mean, I'll tell you at the technical level, it was more about resourcing and architecture. I mean, if you're talking about dynamically adding annotations, it's not as simple as it is in a fixed page architecture, right? I mean, PDF is like, hey, there's this annotation is associated with this region on this particular page, and you're kind of done. When you want to say, hey, we want to do an annotation on this particular dynamic element, that particular dynamic element may disappear the next time someone imports data. That particular dynamic element may end up on another page or may be hidden during certain periods of time. So implementing that would have to be implemented at the language level and then followed on by implementing it at the viewer level as well. So it was a complicated problem, and it just never rose to the, we all have our priority stacks, and it just never rose to the top of the priority stack as far as I know.
Yeah, and Anatole's absolutely right. And I will add another thing. At the last time that it was significantly considered, or at least, again, rose itself far enough up the stack, was enough years ago that there weren't other standards or other methods that we could have looked at and leveraged. I would say things are very different today. I think that if that was a problem that was that it needed to be solved, as in given any value. If it needs to be solved for customers, there's now an excellent standard out there called Open Annotations, which is a great model for applying annotations on any format, especially XML or HTML based, that would work very, very nicely against an XFA form and address the problems that Anatol described. So there are solutions that we now know years later that could address the problems we had. Whether it's worth it, whether a viewer is going to do it, I think is going to come back to customer demand, just with anything else.
Great. Well, we're just about close to 10 of. So I thank you all for your insights and greatly appreciate that. And if there are no other questions, we're doing a what, coffee break? Coffee break? Okay, last chance. I know there's some questions bubbling in there somewhere. No? Okay. Oh, there we go. We'll bring the microphone to you.
We all know that the XFA specification is nothing like the PDF reference, and it is more like a guideline or a user guide to XFA. Is there any plan to standardize the XFA specification?
No plans to improve the spec right now. I mean, if somebody really is bored and has nothing better to do and wants to take on the job, we'll certainly help you. But no, we have no active plans to improve the spec at this time. Bruno, you've been doing a lot of writing recently. Do you want to add this to your list?
Yeah.
Ask the question. When we implementation the XFA, like some of our algorithm, when we try to save the XFA, the data say that the checksum, we don't know how to computing the checksum, right? We send the request to the Adobe, and everybody later on figure out, yeah, it's internal algorithm to do it. So my question is, when we want to publish that one, how to do it? Because we implement, when we save the XFA, they always get compliant, get modified.
Yeah, that's internal. We don't know. I'll just repeat myself because I'm the one who always answers. I'm the one who gets to answer those questions these days. Although Chuck, can I send them to you again? That was so much nicer in those days where I could just blame you on it. The answer is that we've looked into it. I have gone and researched it. I've looked at the code. I've talked to the relevant people. It goes back to what I sort of commented on earlier. We could document it, but it would lock us into an implementation we are not prepared to be locked into right now. Again, I think this goes to just how important this is to the industry, about whether we really need to do this or we need to look at alternatives or what the options are, and I'm certainly willing to have that larger conversation, but right now the answer remains we're not prepared to document that right now.
And since I'm one of the three people, because I know Bruno's looked at this, I just sent Leonard mail about this a couple weeks ago. There is one significant thing, which is forms. For any of you that are XFA people, there's a specific kind of field you can do which is unbound, meaning it doesn't go back into the XML data. And this is all about how those are represented. Those are actually probably the worst forms that you could have. Okay? They could be viewed as degenerate forms because it isn't represented in the XML. People aren't doing scripting right. It's not a good answer to a customer, but the true answer is you should be designing your form so you don't have this as a problem.
In other words, doctor, it hurts when I do this.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I mean, another solution to that issue is, I think, what Bruno's implementation is just consume it on the server so that it doesn't actually have to get laid out by a viewer and shipped down, and use it for what it does well, which is pull in XML and lay it out.
But it would be having this information be public would be a great thing for interoperability of XFA implementations of form capture products. So,
Well, the only thing I'd say to that is, if those types of forms are degenerate, should we be helping people make them?
Yeah, but whoever, I've posted the question on Stack Overflow, and whoever answers it, it's an easy 15 points on Stack Overflow.
See, I thought you worked for Stack Overflow.
Yeah, I was
for the
actually
longest
surprised
time.
that yours wasn't, that Java and iText were one of like the top questions on Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
You need to work harder.
Your reputation's just, it's falling there.
Your cloud score, you know.
Okay, any additional questions before I go get some coffee myself? Anyone? Okay. Thank you all again.
Thank you.